We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're back with Lisa and Tim Donner, the dynamic duo, discussing the impending midterms and the activist pollsters. Lisa, we keep talking about this interview with the founder of Trafalgar, and I really want to dive into this because I did a read-up of it, but I didn't actually watch the interview. But I believe he said something about how well polls are done depending on their length. Could you tell me about that?
Well, he I think put it more succinctly than anyone who I've ever heard do it, and he does it in this sort of backward sort of Southern drawl, Georgia Southern drawl, but it's really a charming delivery. But he says, are these polls really trying to affect the electorate or reflect the electorate?
It's a brilliant statement.
It is, and I think more and more, if they were trying to reflect the electorate, his point was they should all be fired. I mean, mostly because they've been getting it wrong, many, many elections over. But the fact that they haven't been getting fired, they haven't been changing this, maybe what the point he's making is maybe what they're really trying to do is to affect the election. And in other words, they use the poll as a narrative rather than, because a lot of things happen via poll information. For instance, where should you put your party apparatchiks? Where should you put your heavy donors? What, all these decisions are made. Is a really bad poll going to keep voter turnout down? Do you want voter turnout down in the election? So in other words, they're doing what's called push polling. I call it fake polling. But to get back to your questionnaires, when somebody calls you up, Mark, even if they're on your cell phone, and they tell you they want to take a poll and it's 40 questions, what's your answer going to be?
Not a chance. Never going to happen. Ask me one and be done.
Click. The answer is click. And so what Trafalgar is doing, and I think a lot of other pollsters who really want to reflect the electorate are going to be doing more and more of, is they do like 7 or 8 questions, In other words, people are willing to sit for 7 or 8 questions. And then you have to ask yourself, who are those people that are willing to sit for the 40 questions?
Well, you say 40 questions.
Activists.
Yeah.
Activists, retired people, lonely people. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. Non-busy people.
Not a precise demographic to reflect the general electorate. In 2020, Mark and Lisa, you may recall this. In October of 2020, there was a poll released, and I believe it was one of the networks. It was either NBC or ABC. In Wisconsin, had Biden leading by 17 points. 17 points, and he wound up winning by about half a percentage point. So that reflects what you say, Liz, that this stuff is designed to basically to disengage Republicans who think that it's hopeless. They become demoralized. They see polls like this. And they figure, what's the point of showing up? That could have made a difference in Wisconsin in 2020. But I think the other point about polls is in 2016, they took a lot of heat because they got the winner wrong. They said it would be Clinton and it was Trump. In 2020, they didn't take as much heat because they predicted Biden and Biden won. However, overlooked in all this was most of those polls were saying that Biden was going to win by about 7 points. And in fact, he won by 3.5. So they were just as inaccurate, honestly, as 2016, but they didn't take the heat because they ultimately picked the person who won.
There's a couple of interesting points about polls that I find fascinating, and I hope you and the listeners will as well. For example, I was reading a YouGov Ipsos poll this morning, and it was over. I read the crosstabs again, so you don't have to. Although right. I know that that's one of Lisa's guilty pleasures.
Yes,
but it was more than 80 questions. Now, the kind of people who answer those things, as you pointed out, these are non-busy people, but they're also activists. And I don't know if you know this. I'm sure you do. But I find an interesting factor is that some people, when they start doing a poll, they will give the opposite party affiliation. So, for example, if they're a
Right.
Republican, they'll say they're a Democrat. If they're a Democrat, they'll say they're a Republican, or they'll say they're independent. And then what they'll do is they'll give the answers that a straight Democrat, for example, would give, or that a straight Republican would give, but by aligning themselves with the opposite party. So it runs the numbers either way. And they're doing this because essentially they're activists in their minds. They're legends in their lunchtimes, as we like to say in the UK. But I find that an interesting facet. And by having a poll that really just focuses on 5, 6, 7 questions, you're more likely to get a genuine answer. And I think that's probably, that's where we want polling to be, right? We want the genuine tools so we can statistically analyze them and figure out where things are going. Is that too much to ask?
Well, it's interesting that you brought up the YouGov poll, because what happens is that the pollster needs to adjust for the fake responses. One of the things Cahaley was saying in the interview is that people often give 2 lies in every one is how much money did they make. They either overestimate or underestimate, and the other one is their party affiliation. They'll say they're Democrat when they're Republican, or they say they're Republican when they're Democrat, or they say they're independent when they voted Democrat the last 8 elections. And what they're pulling out that does is they dig into, and the other thing you have to pay attention to is this poll likely voters or registered voters? Likely voters are people who have actually gone to the polls, or maybe, relatively recently. Registered voters are just, they're registered to vote. I mean, but maybe they haven't been, voting in the last 4 cycles. You're much better off with likely voters, and then digging in, looking at how did they vote the last 8 times. Republican, are they saying they're an independent, but they voted Republican the last 8 times? It's absurd.
It is.
There's the thing is about these polls trying to put together all the demographics. You have the added factor now of massive mail-in voting, which makes registered voters, it seems to me, more likely to become likely voters because it takes a lot less effort than standing in line. I don't think we're going to see how this whole mail-in ballot thing is going to completely flesh out over time until 2024 is over. But of course, the Democrats want as much mail-in voting as possible, and the Republicans want the least amount possible because they feel, and this was the Carter Commission back in 2005, after the 2004 election, pinpointed mail-in voting as the greatest potential source of fraud of any kind of voting.
Well, actually, it's funny, here in Europe, there's most countries ban mail-in voting for precisely that reason. So we've discussed what issues we think will be most prevalent towards the 2022 elections and the 2024 elections and beyond. But do you think that Joe Biden and his party can pivot towards those in the short time that they have left? Or won't they bother? This one's open to both of you.
Yeah.
I think they're going to pivot away from progressive issues because they realize how toxic they are. They went in full steam on wokeness in 2020, and they're paying a huge price for it now. And you see the results of people being freed after violent crimes in New York, for example. This is really, really bad optics for the Democrats. I think the progressives are in the process of crashing and burning because their ideas are so impractical, and they also are dangerous. And I think people are realizing it more and more, that just letting people out of prison and throwing trillions of dollars at problems is no way to go through life. Just like fat,
drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life.
Yes, exactly.
The great National Lampoon movie, Animal House. So,
Lisa Dunham, we'll give you the last word.
Tim, if what you say is right, that women are going to be coming out in droves in this election, then I do see one progressive issue as perhaps taking a nosedive, and that is the issue of schools. I think when you start messing with children, mothers get riled up. And, there's a lot going on in the school systems now in the United States, and there's a lot of parents that are really riled up about it. And I think this is one area that really could go against the progressives.
It already is,
my
as we
thought.
saw from, it already is, as we
Glenn
saw
Youngkin.
with Glenn Youngkin in Virginia.
Exactly.
He won that race almost exclusively
Exactly.
on that issue.
Lisa K. Donner, Tim Donner, thanks ever so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
After this short break, we'll be right back with Scott Cassenta discussing Liberty's death by 1,000 cuts. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's
Hi, I'm
Lisa
Lisa
K.
K.
Donner.
Donner.
Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.